It had been a lonely night, and a restless one. Kirk sat up in bed and surveyed his quarters. They had that uncertain, not quite real look, the predictable result of not enough sleep. It was his own fault. If he hadn't resurrected the past the night before, if he hadn't stirred it up. Kirk tapped the stud that activated his personal monitor, and Lieutenant Uhura's image came up on the screen.
"Sorry to bother you so early, sir, but it's Mr. Spock. He's calling from the colony's communication center."
"Put him through, Lieutenant." Uhura's sultry beauty was replaced by the Vulcan's poker-faced calm.
"Good morning, Captain."
"Is it Spock?" "It's difficult to tell." The Vulcan arched an eyebrow.
"I wish to make a request, sir. Dr. Marcus believes that there is a flaw in the G7 unit's operation, one which is leading to decreased oxygen production. I would like an opportunity to find the flaw, and perhaps to correct it. The Enterprise can pick me up on its return trip through the sector."
The captain thought about it. "You think you can make a difference, Spock?"
"I think it is possible."
"All right, then. You've got my blessing."
"Thank you, Captain. Spock out."
An instant later, the screen went blank, and the captain was alone again with his thoughts. McCoy was washing his hands at the sink when the doors whispered open, and his next patient walked into the room. Glancing over his shoulder, he was surprised to find a boy looking back at him. "Howdy." The boy had curly blonde hair and soft brown eyes. "Are you the doctor?" "Yep. My name's Leonard. What's yours?" "David." Though he couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, the boy didn't exhibit any of the childish qualities the Pfeffer and Garcia kids had. There was no wariness in him, just a lot of healthy curiosity. "Are you here all alone, David? Usually kids see me with their parents." "I was supposed to meet my mom here, but I was a little early, so..." "So you decided to come see what this medical exam business is all about?" "Well, there's not much to see, just this, really. It's called a tricorder." "Dr. Marcus, this is a surprise. Can I help you?" The woman was a little out of breath, as if she'd been rushing. Frowning, she glanced at the boy. "Hi, David." The boy looked up at her. "Hi, Mom." McCoy cursed himself for a fool. Now that he saw them together, there was no mistaking their relationship. They had the same coloring, the same proud cheekbones and graceful bearing. "I see my son beat me here, Doctor. I hope he hasn't been any trouble." "None at all." So Carol Marcus had a son. Clearly, the captain had a surprise in store. "Well then, as long as you're both here, why don't we get started? I'll just call up the colony roster and... That's strange. David's not listed. David, would you excuse us a moment? I have something to discuss with Dr. McCoy." The boy shot her the kind of withering look children give their parents when they're excluded from conversations, but he didn't argue. As the doors closed behind him, Carol turned to look at the doctor. There was an almost defiant cast to her features. "Dr. McCoy, David is on the colony personnel roster. He's just not on the one you have. And the reason he doesn't appear there is because Dr. Boudreau was doing me a favor." "I don't get it. What were you trying to do? Keep me from examining him?" "No, I'm not that foolish. You see, a long time ago, I knew Jim Kirk quite well." "I know. The captain's mentioned you once or twice. He spoke well of you, too, but that doesn't explain..." "He doesn't know I have a child, Dr. McCoy, and I want it to stay that way." Bones began to ask why, but before he could get the words out, all the pieces fell into place. Kirk's relationship with Carol Marcus had ended about 10 years ago, and there was something about the boy's eyes that seemed rather familiar now that he thought about it. Damn! The boy is Jim's son! "Yes, but as I'm sure you know, your captain has no inkling David exists. I wish they'd sent some other ship." "But they sent the Enterprise. And once you knew they were coming, you convinced Dr. Boudreau to give me a personal computer separate from the colony's main processor. and to delete David's name from my roster so Jim wouldn't suspect anything. But why go to all this trouble? Why don't you want Jim to know? That's none of your business. Dr. Marcus, it's his flesh and blood. He has a right. No, it's up to me what he knows and what he doesn't. Blazes, put yourself in Jim's place. Imagine someone keeping that kind of thing from you. I don't have to justify my actions, Dr. McCoy. Not to anybody. I'll go get David. As she turned away from him, he called after her. Damn it, woman! At least give it some thought! So, McCoy wanted you to reconsider. But my decision was the same as before. David is my business. Jim's not to know about him. Carol and Dr. Boudreau were in the lab dome, working at adjacent terminals, speaking in low tones so no one else could hear. Why? Don't you approve? Now that I've met the man, I can't help but feel for him. He strikes me as the kind I wouldn't mind having for a friend. You wouldn't be disappointed either. He's a very good friend. That's part of the problem, isn't it? If you hated him, you wouldn't feel so guilty. It was part of the problem, all right. The night before, when they were walking in the woods, she'd almost weakened. She'd almost said she wanted him back, no matter what. That doesn't change anything. I've still got to look after my son's best interest, and that means sticking to my guns. Did I hear something about guns? In a long, dizzy moment, Carol whirled and saw Jim standing behind her. She felt her cheeks grow hot. Kirk smiled. Something wrong? No, you just startled me, that's all. Sorry. I came to say goodbye. Dr. McCoy tells me he's finished his checkups. And as you know, Spock's staying on a while, so there's no excuse for us to linger. Well then, I guess we'll see you on your way back. For just a fraction of a second, his smile faltered, and she knew that she wouldn't see him on the way back. The Enterprise would come for Spock, but the captain wouldn't beam down. It was good seeing you again, Carol. He turned to Boudreau. Doctor? Thank you for your help, Captain. And then he was leaving, but Carol felt an ache in her throat. Before she knew what she was doing, she called out, Jim, wait! He stopped, turned and looked at her expectantly. Why had she cried out, she asked herself. What had she meant to tell him? Suddenly something occurred to her, something that seemed fitting somehow, and more importantly, something that would postpone his leaving by a minute or two. Come on. Where are we going? You'll see. Holding onto his arm, she guided him to their destination at the far end of the garden. What are these? The Klingon flowers I was telling you about, the fire blossoms. She got down on her knees and dug one out with her bare hands. Brushing aside a strand of hair that had gotten in her eyes, Carol handed it to him. Water it occasionally. Outside of that, you don't have to worry. They're tough to kill. A parting gift? Something like that. You know, it was always hard to say goodbye to you. You always managed. Jim nodded. Managing it one more time, he took out his communicator. One to beam up. In the next couple of instants, he began to shimmer and then to fade. Finally, he was gone altogether. Velid turned to see his second officer enter the weapons room. Big-shouldered and strapping, his large, protuberant eyes sought the captain's. Is something amiss, sir? Velid made a sweeping gesture with his left hand. A moment later, the room was empty of all personnel except the two of them. Velid himself and Second Officer Krug. I understand you plan to assassinate First Officer Gidris. Krug stiffened, but he didn't ask how Velid knew. That is correct. Normally, I do not interfere, but this time I will stand in your way. Is it permitted to ask why? Veled told him what he wanted to know. By the time he was done, Krug knew almost as much about their mission as Veled himself did. So you see, Second Officer, there is no room for personal ambition on this ship, at least until we complete our mission. I have one request, my lord, that you refrain from informing Gidris of my intention to kill him. It would, after all, make my job that much more difficult when the time comes. Done. I will keep your intention a secret. Krug grunted. When I am First Officer, Excellency, I will make you wonder how you ever tolerated a purist like Gidris. See that you do, Krug. See that you do. Once again, there were 4 of them in the briefing room. However, with Spock back at Beta Kanzandia, Scotty had been brought in to round out the diplomatic team. As you know, we'll be arriving shortly at Alpha Meloria 6, the site of a certain amount of civil unrest. As you also know, Ambassador Farquhar has been assigned the task of settling this unrest. Ambassador? The situation is not simply one of unrest, Captain. It borders on civil war. You see, the planet has 2 main religious groups, the Mantil and the Oberat. In recent months, they've come into conflict over a herd of docile beasts in the region, beasts which, according to the Mantil, carry the souls of long-dead holy men. As a result, they insist on allowing the beasts access to anywhere and everywhere, including an ancient city which happens to contain the holy places of the Oberat. Ah, and the Oberat take offense at the idea. Very astute, Mr. Scott. Ironically, the Mantil's sacred beasts were dying off some years ago, until the Federation provided them with certain medicines. Thanks to us, the animals are now more plentiful than ever, which is why they've begun to broaden the path of their seasonal migrations to include the Oberat's sacred precinct. When the first beasts passed through some days ago, there were heated protests, but the main part of the herd is still on its way. And when it passes through... He let his words hang in the air. They had the desired effect, eliciting visions of religion-inspired chaos and carnage. Let me get this straight. These people are ready to go to war over whether or not animals have the right to walk in the streets? To put it succinctly, Doctor, yes. And as Federation citizens, the Malurians have the right to ask for assistance. Kirk reached out to the monitor in the center of the table. Yes, Uhura.
There's a response to our hail, sir.
On screen, please, Lieutenant. A moment later, the monitor showed the image of the Malurians' highest official, First Minister Trafford. Like all Malurians, his skin was as black as ebony, with web-like patterns around the mouth and chin area. Silvery pale eyes looked out at the captain from cavernous sockets. Greetings. I'm James T. Kirk, captain of the Enterprise. I believe you were expecting us, First Minister.
Blessed be your every incarnation, Captain. We have indeed been expecting you.
The skin around Trafford's mouth seemed to be twitching. Kirk was no expert on Malurian facial expressions, but he couldn't escape the feeling that something was amiss. Oh no, we're too late. Ignoring Farquhar, though that was no easy task under the circumstances, the captain concentrated on Trafford. You seem discomfited, First Minister. Am I to understand that the discord has intensified?
It has indeed. If you beam down to our government hall, I will elaborate.
As you wish. Kirk out. As Trafford's image faded, the captain noticed Farquhar glaring at him. I told you there was no time to waste, Captain. Now the conflict has escalated, and who knows to what extent. As annoying as the man's manner was, he wasn't entirely wrong. The conflict had escalated, and a good deal more quickly than Starfleet had anticipated. Ambassador, I suggest we wait to see exactly what has transpired among the Malurians before we formulate any opinions. Sure. Let's wait. As if waiting wasn't what got us into this mess. The Malurian Hall of Government was a hexagonal room with 6 long windows. As Kirk and his party materialized, they saw Trafford and 3 other robed figures waiting for them. The ambassador took the initiative, touching his index and middle finger to his temples. "First Minister." Trafford returned the gesture. "You must be Ambassador Farquhar." "I am, and these are my colleagues from Starfleet, Captain Kirk, whom you've met, Dr. McCoy, and Lieutenant Commander Scott. They have been dispatched to assist me in my mission." McCoy leaned close to Kirk. "We're his assistants?" "In a nutshell, Bones, yes." Trafford looked to his own colleagues. "Allow me to introduce my fellow ministers, Entrath, Illiman, and Dacer. Regrettably, Meniki and Omelas have absented themselves from these premises indefinitely. They have resigned as ministers." The ambassador nodded. Glancing at the captain, he expanded on Trafford's explanation. "Meniki and Omelas were Oberat." "I see. And the reason for their departure, First Minister?" "Finding no satisfaction in this chamber, Meniki and Omelas took their arguments to the streets. There was violence. They went into hiding. We suspect they are still here in the Mother City, but it is only a suspicion." "That is unfortunate. It will complicate matters considerably." "Indeed." "You know, it might not be a bad idea for us to visit the Oberat's holy places, and I'd like to get a look at your sacred animals." "There's no need for that, Captain. I'd like to see the holy places as well, but I don't think the First Minister would want us to disturb the sacred beasts." "On the contrary, Ambassador, if you are to help us, you must get a feeling for the things we hold dear. I will make arrangements for you to see both, the holy places of the Oberat and the sacred herd." Only a slight ruddiness in his cheeks betrayed the ambassador's pique. He touched his fingers to his temples again. "As you wish, First Minister." From the playground, the domed colony buildings in the distance looked like pearls half buried in the ochre-colored ground. And the lab dome, David noted, looked like the biggest pearl of all. That's where Mr. Spock was bound to be, talking with Dr. Boudreau about the G7 unit, which was about all he'd done since he got here. His mother had made it clear he was supposed to avoid Mr. Spock as best he could, though she hadn't said why. "Hey, Marcus!" He turned at the sound of his name. Royden was sitting on the top rung of the playground's white plastic monkey bars. Pfeffer and Juan were twisting themselves around a lower rung, while Medford and Garcia tossed a football. "Daydreaming again, Marcus? How come you're always a million miles away?" David didn't answer. He just walked over to the white plastic swing set and sat down on one of the swings. "My dad says daydreamers never get anywhere. He says they dream their whole lives away." Planting his feet and launching himself backward, David began to swing. Immediately, the air felt even cooler against his face, and as he kicked higher and higher, he lost himself in the hard blue sky. He found it easier and easier to forget Royden and Pfeffer and their little cruelties. "Hey, Marcus!" It was Royden again. No doubt he'd seen another opportunity to call David a daydreamer. This time, though, Royden could shout himself purple. "Hey, Marcus, Marcus!" That was Pfeffer, joining in on the fun. "Ignore it," David told himself. "Don't give in." "Marcus!" It was Medford. David opened his eyes. The other children were clustered around the swing set, their eyes drawn to the colony buildings. He looked that way also and saw a swarm of dark figures making its way from dome to dome. And they weren't colonists, not by a long shot. As David leaped from the swing and landed on the sandy ground, he saw a flash of light among the domes. Pfeffer moaned a single word. "Klingons!" David took another look at the dark, scurrying figures and knew that Pfeffer was right. They were Klingons, the worst killers in the galaxy. Their parents, his mother, they were all in terrible danger. Juan began to cry. It got David's brain working again. Listen, everybody. They're going to come for us next. They're going to check the colony roster and realize we're missing and come after us.
But we're just kids.
No, we're humans. I don't know what they're doing here, but you can be sure they don't want witnesses. I say we go back into the hills. We'll be safe there. As always, all eyes fell on Royden. He shook his head.
You're talking like little kids. They'll find us no matter where we hide, and when they do, they'll torture us to death.
To death? It was just like back at the Fisher. Royden was too good at making the others think what he wanted them to think. He could make courage seem like stupidity and common sense seem like cowardice. I'm not going to just stand here and wait for them to find us. I'm going. Who's with me?
Nobody's going with you, Marcus. They're staying here with me.
Nobody moved, not even Medford. David didn't want to leave his friends at the mercy of the Klingons, but he had no choice. Turning his back on them, he started up the hill. Before he'd gone half a dozen steps, however, he heard a terrible, high-pitched scream from down among the colony buildings. Glancing back over his shoulders, he saw yet another flash. Suddenly, Medford started after him. He could see she had tears in her eyes, but she was coming along. Even more unexpectedly, Juan followed, and Garcia as well, and finally, Pfeffer. That left Royden standing all alone in the shadow of the monkey bars. The older boy glared at David and his companions.
You're crazy. You're just gonna make it worse for everybody.
But his words seemed strangely flat and lifeless. David wasn't sure how, but Royden's hold on them had been broken.
Lame brains. Skeezits. You're making a big mistake.
Still amazed at the way things had turned out, David resumed his trek up the hillside. The others fell in behind him. Royden's voice cracked like a whip in the chill air.
You'll see I was right. You'll see.
Carol saw it out of the corner of her eye, a flash of blue-white light outside her garden enclosure, but when she turned, there was nothing there. She was about to chalk it up to imagination when she saw a whole series of flashes, one right after the other, and then, as she sat back on her haunches and tried to figure out what was going on, a scream pierced the stillness. Her blood froze. Dropping the vegan fern she held in her hands, she scrambled for the entrance, and would have gone tearing out of the place altogether were it not for the sight that stopped her like a duranium wall. Klingons. A lot of them. Maybe as many as 20, swaggering about in their heavy, dark body armor. They were herding the colonists out of the laboratory dome, waving their weapons as if they were only too eager to use them. Carol knew now what the flashes had been. Disruptor fire. Had they actually killed anyone? Her stomach clenched painfully at the thought. Suddenly she remembered. David. Where was he? In the hills, she thought, with the other children. Safe, at least for now. But they wouldn't be safe for long. Once the invaders accessed the computer's personnel files, they'd know that the children were missing. They were all on the colony roster. Not the one that had gone up to the Enterprise, with David's name purposely left out, but the master list in the central computer. Her heart began to race. If she did nothing else, she had to purge the children from the files. Counting to 200, she poked her head out of the enclosure again. There was no one around, neither Klingons nor colonists. Praying no one spotted her, she made her way across the flat, open space between the garden and the lab dome entrance. It seemed like an eternity before the lab door slid aside, revealing the interior of the lab. Slipping inside, she headed for the nearest workstation, unable to keep from noticing how many of the monitors had been smashed. And the G7 unit? It was gone. The latticework of energy transfer tubes that dominated the center of the lab had a gap in it 1 meter long. No doubt the Klingons were dismantling it at this very moment, and in the process undoing all that Dr. Boudreau had accomplished. After all, there was only one G7 unit in the entire galaxy. If it were destroyed, it would take years to build another. Turning her attention to the terminal in front of her, Carol called up the colony personnel directory. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, deleting the names of the children one at a time. Finally, she was done. And not a moment too soon, because in the next instant, the door slid open and a grinning Klingon filled the aperture with his bulk. Carol clenched her teeth as he aimed his disruptor at her. For a long moment, she thought she was a goner. But her luck held. The Klingon didn't press the trigger. He just gestured for her to come outside. Thank God, she thought. Suddenly, sharing the fate of her colleagues didn't seem so terrible compared to the alternative.
Are you certain, Gidris?
Quite certain, Captain Velid. Mallet has only had a day to examine the humans' research data, but it is already fairly obvious. The central unit, the device that accelerates plant growth, is missing.
Then one of the colonists must be missing as well.
Actually, Captain, we have one colonist too many. The captain of the Cottonrod leaned forward, planting his elbows on the desk before him. The desk that had so recently belonged to one of the colonists.
Too many? How is that possible?
I can't say for sure, Excellency, but I suspect his age is a factor. He is 12 years old.
Too young, perhaps, to be listed as an official member of the colony.
Velid thought about it, then shook his head.
The Federation maintains lists of all its equipment components. Why not an individual, no matter how young he is? There must be another explanation. Bring me the boy. Maybe he can tell us himself. Damn, I've never seen such a herd. You can say that again, sir.
A huge blue-green valley spread out before them. In the valley was a broad river sparkling in the bronze light of Alpha Meluria. And in the river, crowding it from bank to bank, stood the Kubaya, the beasts that stood at the center of this world's religious conflict. From Kirk's vantage point, they looked like walruses with short, muscular legs instead of flippers. Not a very attractive animal, but then it wasn't the beast's beauty that commended them to the Manteel. Their guide looked back at them over his shoulder.
Oh, do not worry about getting too close. They are used to seeing riders around. We have them patrolling for predators along the river, though the predators themselves are not the biggest danger. It is the wind which carries the predator's scent. The Kubaya may look lethargic now, but if they should catch the smell of a Getrex, you will find them most active. If we did not provide protection for the herd, more Kubaya would die in stampedes than in the jaws of the Getrexan. Scotty turned to the captain. Begging your pardon, sir, but isn't that the solution to our problem?
Kirk started to ask the engineer what he meant, then he stopped himself. I see what you mean, Scotty. Ambassador, Mr. Scott here may have come up with an answer, a way to satisfy both the Manteel and the Oberat.
And that is?
Scotty told him. The ambassador nodded sagely.
It just might work. I'll send word to the council to expect us. Your name?
Timothy Royden. There are 2 Roydens listed in the personnel file, Excellency. Neither is called Timothy. How is it that you are not listed with the others, boy? Timothy Royden, if that was truly his name, shook his head. I don't know. The truth. or I'll personally see to it that you suffer." The boy's eyes grew red and wet as they looked up at the Klingon. His nose started to run. It was amazing how easily human children could be broken. Vellet had heard it from the other captains who'd had dealings with Federation colonies, but until now, he hadn't believed it. I told them to come back." Vellet leaned forward until his elbows rested on his knees and his face was mere inches from the humans. "Who? You told who to come back?" "Marcus and the others. I told them, but they wouldn't listen." "The one you call Marcus and these others, who are they?" "They're kids like me." "And they took the G7 unit?" Suddenly, the boy looked confused. "No, the unit's in the lab dome." "Do you mean to tell me you don't know what happened to it?" I don't know anything about the G7, I swear it. Please don't hurt me, please." The captain was caught between anger and revulsion. "Enough, Gidris. More than enough. Take him away." Obediently, Gidris dragged the boy out of his chair and flung him in the direction of the door. Timothy Royden stumbled, recovering only long enough to shoot Vellet a miserable, frightened glance. Then Gidris shoved him out of the dome altogether. Vellet shook his head. If one of his sons had turned out like the human child, he would have died long ago and at his father's hands. Pushing his revulsion to one side, he asked himself what his next step should be. There was only one answer. Despite Timothy Royden's protestations, the other human children, who had also failed to show up in the computer files apparently, must have taken the G7 device. And if that were so, they had to be found. As before, Trafford and his colleagues were waiting for the Federation people. But this time, the First Minister seemed more impatient. "Matters have taken a turn for the worse, haven't they, First Minister?" "You are perceptive, Captain. As the Kubaya approach the Mother City, the rioting is spreading to other cities across our world. We restore order in one place, only to find the Oberat have created chaos in 2 others. I'm sorry to hear that, First Minister, but we may have found a way to resolve your dispute." "So I understand, Ambassador. Please present your solution, but remember, we will tolerate nothing that may displace the Kubaya against their wishes." Understood. We've heard that the Kubaya have a strong negative reaction to predator scents. In short, they run from them. If this is the case, why not domesticate 1 or 2 of these predators and leave them in the vicinity of the sacred monuments? The Kubaya will not be harmed, but rather encouraged to stay away. The ministers conferred in subdued tones. Then they regarded the ambassador again.
"It is unacceptable. The Oberat will reject the intrusion of the Getrexan in their sacred areas as strongly as they reject the Kubaya. One form of beast is like another to them."
The ambassador's mouth was open. He closed it, then darted a sidelong glance at Scotty as if to say, "Sorry, but it really wasn't a very good idea to begin with." But McCoy wasn't as willing as Farquhar to throw in the towel.
"Wait a minute. Let's think about this. If we can't use real animals, how about just their scents? We can extract them without causing the Getrexan any discomfort, and—"
Trafford held up his hand.
"That would be just as unacceptable to the Oberat. Any evidence of a Getrex, even just its scent, constitutes a desecration of their sacred ground. Well, then how about a chemical compound, one which smells like the Getrexan but is created in a laboratory? It would have the same effect on the Kubaya as the real thing, but being artificial, it shouldn't put the Oberat's noses out of joint." "Real or artificial, Doctor, it would smell like a Getrex, and the Oberat would reject the idea."
McCoy scowled.
"All right. What if the compound emulates a beast this world has never heard of? Say a Terran wolverine or an Aldebaran Kyrgyz. They'd probably have the same effect on the Kubaya."
Trafford shook his head.
I am afraid not. You must understand, Doctor, the Oberat are simply not a reasonable people.
Seems to me there's an answer out there somewhere if we can only dig it out. First Minister, I apologize on behalf of all of us. Next time, we won't waste your time with flimsy suggestions. Flimsy of all the... A look from the captain stopped the chief engineer. Ambassador, you need not worry about making demands on our time. We do not expect you to solve this problem on your own, after all. Farquhar placed his index and middle fingers against his temples. As you wish, First Minister. You see, Captain? Krug was standing in the human's garden enclosure. He watched Veled stroke the long, dark petals of one of the fire blossoms. And where did the humans say these came from? The wreck of the Ulud. Bah! The Ulud under Captain Amag, an effete Kamordag cultivator of flowers. Do you understand what they were doing, Krug? They were removing the dying specimens from around the fire blossoms so they could plant these others in their place. These lesser organisms could not stand up to the presence of a Klingon life form, just as the colonists cannot stand up to us. The Federation is so weak as to make even the Kamordag seem strong by comparison. Suddenly Gidris appeared in the entranceway. There were two others with him, Lutek and Oros. The first officer didn't seem pleased to see Veled and Krug together. You have something for me, Gidris? Indeed, Captain. Tarek's completed his sensor scan. It seems Timothy Royden was not the only human the computer failed to mention. The sensors have detected 5 others huddled together in the hills north of this place. And, sir, all of them are children. Then the Royden whelp was speaking the truth. These children must have the G7 unit, or at least know where it is. Krug had a thought. Excellency, the humans have gone to great lengths to see that we do not gain access to this device. Perhaps this technology, what do they call it? Terraforming, is not as benign as it seems. Gidris' brow writhed with curiosity. What does that mean? What it means, Gidris, is that the G7 mechanism may be a weapon, despite appearances to the contrary. And if that's so, we're fortunate it's only in the hands of younglings. If we can bring it back to the homeworld, the possibilities are most intriguing. Veled turned to Gidris. Take a 6 men, including Lutek and Oros, out there and track down the missing children. When you find them, you will find the device. Gidris beat his fist against his body armor. I hear and obey, Excellency. To Captain Kirk's eye, the sacred precinct of the Oberat looked as old as civilization itself. 2- and 3-story buildings leaned together like drunken conspirators. Underfoot, the cobblestones were worn and cracked. It was the kind of place he might have liked to linger in, if not for the deadly stares and muttered curses that dogged his group's every step. Feeling a little unwanted? More than a little, Bones. Then again, we should have expected a few funny looks. They must wonder what we're up to. Especially since we got a couple of armed Mantil watching over us. Nothing like seeing the enemy parading through your streets to make you feel a wee bit insecure. I don't see the point in commenting on it, gentlemen. The First Minister made it clear he wouldn't allow us to tour the area without an escort, and I, for one, am glad he insisted. Kirk glanced at their pair of Mantil security guards and frowned. As they emerged from the street into a somewhat wider thoroughfare, he noticed a square full of people a block away. It was the first open area they'd seen. What's that? The nearer of the guards shrugged. The market. It's where the Oberat buy their food and clothing. Can we see it? It's not advisable. In such a crowd, it would be nearly impossible to... Without thinking, the captain took hold of the ambassador and drove him into the ground behind a wooden pushcart. A moment later, He was glad his reflexes had been so sharp. As he looked back, he saw a couple of Oberat youths spraying phaser fire. Their Manteel guards returned the fire. One of them paid the price for it, taking a lethal hit in the center of his chest. The others stood his ground, however. Without flinching, he aimed, fired, and took down one of their assailants. The other Oberat started to back away, squeezing off a couple of blasts to cover his retreat. They didn't help. Coolly, the surviving Manteel skewered him on a blood-red beam. The youth fell in a fuming heap at a woman's feet. Stricken with horror, her eyes opened wide and her fingers climbed into her mouth. For a second or two there was silence, as the import of what had happened began to sink in. Then the Oberat around them started to get ugly. "We've got to get out of here, Captain." The ambassador's eyes were a window on his fear. "Damned right we do." Finding Bones and Scotty across the way, Kirk jerked a thumb in the direction from which they'd come. Then, half-dragging Farquhar, he headed that way. The surviving guard bent and pulled his comrade's body over his shoulder, leaving a bloody stain on the cobblestones. He still had his phaser in his hand, though he had the presence of mind not to make it obvious. "Captain, are you all right, sir?" "Fine, Scotty. Let's see if we can keep it that way." "Kirk to Enterprise."
This is the Enterprise. Something wrong, Captain?
The crowd was starting to pursue them. "Affirmative, Sulu. Have Chief Kyle lock onto my coordinates and beam up 5, including 2 Malurians, 1 dead and 1 alive." There was a pause on the other end.
Captain, Kyle says there are a great many Malurians within close proximity. It may take some time to isolate the ones who are with you.
"Tell Kyle to move it, Lieutenant. We may not have that much time. Kirk out." The crowd behind them was growing. Out of the corner of his eye, the captain saw something thrown at him. He ducked. As it passed by, he saw what it was, a piece of ancient masonry. Another chunk came whizzing at Scotty. Unable to avoid it entirely, he took a glancing blow off his shoulder. God help us, the captain thought. Before long, it'll be a blasted gauntlet. Yet another projectile fell among them. The ambassador clutched the side of his head. Blood trickled from between his fingers. The man was going to run. Kirk could see it in his face. "Don't do it, Ambassador. Don't even think about it." Thrusting his chin out, Farquhar struggled to do as he was told, but his lower lip was trembling, barely able to contain his outrage. They weren't going to last much longer. Suddenly, the Oberat in the intersection charged. Their leader headed for Kirk with a chunk of rock in his hand, prepared to bludgeon him with it. As the captain braced for the impact, nothing happened. And then he realized why that should be. He was no longer standing in a narrow street in the Oberat's sacred precinct. He was on a platform in the Enterprise's transporter room.